Hey everybody, Savage Lines News coming in today with a little bit of Q&A. So I've gathered up a bunch of the questions that you guys have left me over the course of the last couple of weeks in these YouTube comments. And I'm going to address some of them. Just give you my opinion, or I'll attempt to tackle some of the more intricate questions as we go through it. But yeah, let's just dive right into it. Okay, first question from August. So you say CNC and EAF erase face are good 2 for 6s. What about Cadaverous Contraband? Good question. So I used to run Cadaverous Contrabands all the time. Especially when the Phi meta really started to first emerge. I was like looking for any way to get them to block ever, and that was when Dromai was actually kind of on the up and up, right? So we had this interesting time of like Phi, Dromai, and Contraband like really is good into them both. But over time, I actually played with it a lot. And it ended up kind of being more of a detrimental card to me on average than a card that was doing me anything, right? I mean, one, it blocks 2. So, yes, Erase Face blocks 2 also. But Contraband, you have to have already played a Blood Rush for it to be useful. So in the first half of the game, if you draw, you haven't seen a Blood Rush yet, and you draw a Contraband, and it's just a 2 for 6 that doesn't get buffed by Blood Rush and doesn't have a on hit, because like who cares if I get my barraging beatdown back or whatever, right? And then I started playing it into more and more Dromais, and it was kind of weird because it had like this really polarizing effect. Either I continuously looped Blood Rushes perfectly for the entire game and felt like I was untouchable, or I would play this into a dragon and then just keep drawing clunky too many Blood Rush hands. And I think it happened in 2 kind of like high level games in a row where like I played Erase Face and then drew 2 Blood Rushes and had to pitch them. And then every time I played a Contraband, it was kind of like pulling me up all of these non-6 hands. And it was kind of like messing up my cycle and my density, where I just stopped running it, right? I'm so tight on spots right now. If I were to replace any card with Contraband, it would be Erase Face. But I love Erase Face into Dash and Viscerai and to actually quite a few other decks. So I think Erase Face is just slightly better than Contraband. But this is totally up to your playstyle, right? It's a good card, I think CNC is still the best, but it is right there next to Erase Face. All right, next question. Okay, another question here from Krim. What additional nerfs do you think are needed to rein in Iyslander and Oldhim? For Oldhim, I think the growing consensus is Crown of Seeds. Iyslander's a little bit more nuanced. Some folks jump to Stormstriders. Would that be too much? Does it ruin Kano? What about CLF or Ice Vein, etc.? Really interesting topic. Right after the bans, everybody was like, Ice is dead, and then we had our first calling, all Ice top 8. There's a battle-hardened top 8 going on right now, and Ice is majority of it, right? Very prevalent still. So the Ice techs didn't take too much of a hit. Now, I think Oldhim is a little bit of a weird one because he's already gotten so many of his like Earth and Ice cards ripped away from him, where it's kind of like hitting another card seems kind of aggressive. Crown of Seeds is the strongest, probably strongest legendary in the entire game. Taking that away from him would be kind of unfortunate for Oldhim players, right? They're already losing so many cards, and now we're taking away their legendary. Does that feel good? Probably not. Is it part of the problem? Probably, right? Oldhim can just do so much defensively with like a blue, right? Earth React, Ice React, Crown of Seed, Shield, right? He's just got so much more value just sitting there every turn. And he's a Guardian, so it's like he has all of the Guardian cards, which are amazing. And he's got Ice and Earth cards, which are amazing, right? So it's really hard. You could target generics, because I do think a lot of the old generics are part of the problem, especially for Iyslander too, right? But you could hit generics, pummels, but then you're hitting a lot of other decks. Command and Conquer, then you're hitting another, you're talking about another multi-$100 card that a lot of people run that would kind of upset people, right? I think there's actually some time for Oldhim to get knocked down a couple pegs, right? If the meta settles back and aggro starts falling off again, then we can have more room for people to start targeting Oldhim more directly. And I think that might happen. The more competitions go by and the more ice decks that do well, the less aggro decks will show up, and then there's more room to target Oldhim. We also have a whole new set coming out in like a month. So I would say wait on Oldhim for any more bans, to be honest. Let the next set come out, let the meta shake out a little bit more, and we'll see. Iyslander, on the other hand, I think she just abuses the old generics, right? If you really wanted to target a ban for Iyslander without removing the identity of an Ice Mage from her kit, like hit Wounded Bull. Nobody else runs that card, right? Well, nobody else runs it that well. Hit some of those weird generics, right? CLF would be a huge hit to both of these heroes, but, CLF is overtuned, but I don't really know if CLF is like the problem. And I also don't think Ice Mage is a problem. Like, honestly, she doesn't have very many of those, and yes, it's one of her best attacks, but that's not the reason I'm typically losing. The reason I'm losing to her is because she can set up these massive end game kills while just beating me to death with like E-Strike Wounded Bull and E-Strike Fendals and a Scar for a Scar, right? So you could hit some of the more generics if you really wanted to hurt Iyslander. But I do think it's a little bit early again, right? Let's let the meta shake out for a little bit. We've seen this before, an untouchable deck at the top, and then somebody figures it out, especially after a new set. So I'd say wait for the set to come out, give it some more time. But I do think over Flesh and Blood's life, as more and more cards come in, and they're more and more class-based cards, I do think eventually a lot of the generics are going to end up getting wiggled out, because they're strong. They're way strong, right? All right, next question. Okay, another question from Rata Roller. He's asking about Dori. I actually have a lot of people asking about the Dori matchup. Dori is a really unique hero in general. And I think she punishes people who don't understand her kit a lot, right? So I am actually recording a How to Beat Dori video. I'm not sure if it's going to be coming out before or after this one. I'm shooting this one in a couple of videos in advance because I'm going to be going on a trip. But it will be coming out soon. Keep your eyes peeled for it. But Dori is one of the most unique heroes from... Dori's one of the hardest heroes to play against when you're a new player. So I think that's the better way to put it. Because she's one of the only heroes where you have to know what her cards do before she plays them. Right? Every other hero, even if you have no idea what they can do when they play their card on the table, that sure, they can catch you by surprise a couple times, but when they put the card on the table, you read it and you can react to it, right? Like, you're like, okay, well, this is what it does. Let me put my cards down. Let me look at my turn. When Dori attacks with a Dawn Blade, she can have anything in her hands. Anything, right? You don't know what her cards do. So the number one way to beat Dori is to understand what her cards do. Go to Fabrary, go to fabdb.com, go to fabtcg.com, go to the card gallery, and read her cards. You also can just go look at the top deck lists that are doing well around the world, and you'll see the ones that generically are played in events. You'll see the ones that are most likely to be in your opponent's list, and you'll know what those are. One, biggest step, go read her cards, right? And second is to understand what she's really capable of doing. Once you understand her cards, you can start deducing what she might be doing when she attacks with the Dawn Blade. So there's typically, right? I'm kind of over genericizing here. But there's typically a couple ways that Dori will attack you. She'll play a non-attack action that gives her card either go again or a conditional go again, right? Or she'll attack you with a buffed or non-buffed Dawn Blade that doesn't have go again on the table yet. Now, what does that mean? Well, if she's giving the go again at the beginning of the turn, and she spent resources to do that, you can deduce, hopefully, that this card, she already has go again, so she's probably already invested. She probably doesn't have another one of those go again cards in her hand, so she's going to come at you for 6, right? Let's just say. So 6 Dawn Blade. If it hits, it gains go again. She has 2 cards left in her hand, none floating. I don't know, example. Well, if it already has go again, and I put 2 cards down on the table, block 6, but she has 2 cards left, she's probably banking on that card hitting, right? So one of those cards is probably a buff, so you can kind of map out the Dori attack patterns over time, right? Same thing with a naked Dawnblade. If she just puts a Dawnblade on the table for 3 and she has 4 cards left in her hand, there's a lot of danger in those 4 cards. But there's only a handful of cards that give Dawnblade go again, right? There's only a handful. If you memorize them, you know what they do. And if you know how much they cost, okay, well, she's going to have to play that one from hand, like, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the time when they throw a naked Dawnblade at you, it's best to just be like, okay, no blocks, right? And why is that? Because half of her cards give her bonuses when you block with a card from hand. So, there's just a lot of patterns like that that you need to understand. And I'll do a whole video on this. Like, we'll break out the cards that give go again. We'll break out the cards that you need to block or you don't need to block, right? And another really big piece of advice here is put D-Reacts in your deck if you have them. Hopefully you have them. Makes the matchup much easier. Playing cards from Arsenal don't trigger Reprise. So if they Dawnblade for 4 and you play a Sink Below from Arsenal, they don't get to trigger Reprise on that. They don't get the draw. They don't get free buffs. They don't get free anything, right? You can really shut down their turns by not enabling Reprise on turn, like, when you don't have to. So yeah, great question. I'll be focusing on this a lot in the next week or so. Okay, this one's not so much a question. This one's more of like a concept, but I felt like it was an interesting topic to discuss, right? But Lobstress. I think the idea of fatigue as a ground-up design for a hero is not a good choice for this game. Fatigue should result from 2 nearly evenly matched heroes as a neutral game state, rather than an intentional choice for heroes as a primary game plan. Tends to be unbalanced. Let's face it, unfun. These matchups take way too long. Players don't get to enact their primary strategy. And the rest of the armory has to watch and groan as these 2 Oldhims go at each other, right? Actually, I don't mind fatigue as a game design choice. I think I'm a little bit more of a defensive player in general. I'm not really running fatigue decks right now. But as a design choice, I don't think it's that bad. Now, maybe this is the Rhinar in me talking, right? Because I don't have a game plan against fatigue heroes. But I do think as long as fatigue decks work in a way where the other player does get to set up a win con, I think it's okay. Now, what are win cons against fatigue? Well, outvaluing them, right? Going over the top is one way to win against a fatigue deck, right? Pitch stacking is another way to win against a fatigue deck. So right now, I think there are a lot of ways to counter fatigue. The problem is probably that the fatigue decks are not beatable by most of the heroes in the field, right? That's a real problem. So if they go down the fatigue game plan, we need to understand that certain heroes are just going to fall out, right? If fatigue is best, and then they need to buff the heroes that counter fatigue, right? So I think there's like, a lot of Flesh and Blood is kind of rock, paper, scissors format at the end of the day. Certain heroes have auto wins and auto losses, and they always tend to make kind of this triangle of decks that eat each other, and then it's just how you get matched up and how you play. But, we're seeing fatigue Oldhims get beat by Briars who have a game plan for fatigue. Rhinar can beat decks that have a fatigue game plan. Bravo can beat decks that have a fatigue game plan. Icelander can beat it, right? There's actually quite a few decks out there that have a game plan and adapted in time to beat this Oldhim deck. Is Oldhim too good? Maybe, right? Maybe it is a little bit too good. Maybe it is pushing too many decks out. Maybe there is something we have to do about that. But fatigue being a game plan, I actually don't mind, right? Because what it really does is a lot of time when somebody is attempting to fatigue me, they're challenging me to play better than them, right? Because they're putting all of the decision making on my side of the table when they say all I'm going to do is block you. I'm going to block you, right? That's all I'm going to do. That immediately flips on something in my brain where it's like, okay, let's set up a game plan where you can't block me, right? Let's pitch stack that Force of Nature, that Channel Mount Heroic to the bottom. Let's give it all the reds to follow up. Let's do this, right? Let's put the Alpha Rampage at the bottom, the 2 red barraging beatdowns. Like, let's go, right? I'm going to set up these massive turns that you can't block. And maybe that's just because the heroes I play or I like Bravo and Rhinar and stuff like that, can beat fatigue. So maybe, maybe I am overextending a little bit. But I think fatigue decks have a space. They just can't outvalue everybody else with no counterplay, right? Like a assassin. Assassin is a fatigue deck built from the ground up for fatigue. It's not that good right now, but I would say that one's even scarier than Oldhim is because it's actively disrupting my ability to pitch stack. That's scary to me. Oldhim can't stop me from pitch stacking, right? And so I think if more cards come out to support anti-fatigue mindsets, it won't be that big of a deal. But you're right. Like, some classes like Ranger and Dorinthia have a really, really, really hard time into this, right? I'd say Ranger a little bit worse, but they're just by existing, fatigue does shut out certain heroes. Let's get into the next one. Final question. Crowfall. What's your general game plan against 5? I've been getting destroyed. Would love some insights to improve the matchup. It's really unfortunate none of my 5 games got recorded. I had a really good one that it would have been awesome to get at top 8 at Fab Foundry, but they wanted to record one of the other games. So this is another one of those ones where I'm going to have to go find people to play against and then record and go over my thoughts. But at a high level, there's only a handful of cards that matter in the 5 matchup. Only a handful. Command and Conquer, Swing Big, and Blood Rush Bellows. All right? Those are the only attacks that truly matter. Okay? And then I have a gambit of D-Reacts in this matchup. We're running 3 all that all you got. 3 Sync Belows, 1 Fate for Scene. We've got everything in there from a defensive perspective. So Fi is a aggro deck with a lot of spike turns, and it's just consistent. It's consistently doing about the same damage every turn until it spikes, and then it's doing the same damage every turn. There are only 3 cards that Fi has that have an on hit that really does anything. One of them is Snatch. That is the highest priority target to block. That's what your D-Reacts are for. That's what your equipment is for. It is to stop them from getting a free card. Never let them get a free card, right? And the other 2 are the ones that, depending on the number of chain links that Draconic chain links they've played, they can buff a card or give a card go again from their hand. That's basically it. Those are the only on hits that deck has. So when you're defending every single turn, when I said there's only a handful of cards that matter, Swing Big does 8 damage. Command and Conquer can disrupt an arsenal, and then every other one of your cards just does 6, right? Fi will almost never block you. Almost never. Unless they run the 3 Sync Belows or whatever, and then that's the only turn they're really going to block you. So Swing Big is going to go through for 8, right? 8 is almost a fourth of their health. So that Swing Big, probably not getting blocked, going in for 8. So you can defend with all of the cards in your hand, retaliate with 8. You do that, you swing 8, you swing 6, you swing 6. They're around 20 health at that point in time. So just 3 attacks. They're almost already dead. And then you find your single copy of Blood Rush and you do 18 to 20 damage. And now they're in blocking territory. And that's why you run Heart and Cross Strap in this matchup, because your first Blood Rush you find has to go through for 18 perfectly. It has to do 18 to 20 damage. Otherwise, you're in a rough spot. So how I like to look at this matchup is that Fi only has 20 health. And if I perfectly block and swing my Swing Bigs, my CNCs, and my cheap cards, find a Blood Rush as fast as I can and fire it, I'm going to get the Fi into a blocking pattern. And as we all know, Fi only really has 2 block on a vast majority of their cards. So once you start throwing 6 for lethal and intimidating a random card in their hand, they are going to start really struggling to block it. They're probably going to give you the Mask. They're probably going to give you Shuko. They're probably going to give you whatever equipment they have left. And then, boom, eventually you're going to get them with the final Swing Big, and they're going to have to give you their whole hand. And we run every D-React in this matchup that draws a card. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is that all you got will give you 2 health every time you ever pull it, right? Fi will basically guaranteed attack you for 2 twice, or with 2 below 2 attacks twice. So if they Phoenix Flame early in the chain, you know that they're going to tutor up another one and come in for 2, so you should that all you got that one. If they belittle for 2 in the beginning of the chain, you know their Phoenix Flame will come in for 2 later in the chain. The only time that all you got won't get full value is if they end with a Lava Burst that's being buffed. And you can kind of see that coming, you know, if they Phoenix Flame for no reason early or whatever. So that all you got will always net you 2 life. So that's 6 whole life you have extra from that all you got that draws you a card. And you can do some really cool things with that, right? Like a lot of the time I'll block with my first 2 cards, stop an on hit with a piece of equipment or whatever. I'll have a swing big in my hand, and with that all you got. I'll block the Phoenix Flame with that all you got. Keep the swing big in my hand, draw a card off the top, and almost every one of my cards in my deck are not, there's a very, very high chance it's a yellow or blue, right? More than 50% of my cards are yellow or blue. So there's a really high chance I can draw a card and just play swing big from my hand. That's huge. Block 8, block 6, 7, 8, swing 8, 16-point trade, massive. It works with CNC, it works with everything else, right? And since you're drawing cards from that all you got, you're syncing cards with Sync Below. You're syncing, you're opting with Fate for Scene. You're playing your 1 copy of Tome that maybe draws you 2 cards. There's an incredibly high number of cards that are drawing you cards. Like you're digging, right? You're gonna find a Blood Rush, and you're gonna find it pretty fast unless you're just like way unlucky, And unlike Phi, we have the ability to block. If they hit their Artivore early, throw your hand down, right? We're blocking it. Stop it. Don't let them get free damage. If they signal Mask and you have really good cards in your hand, but you know that they're going to pull up, Assault the Wounds, just block it, right? Stop the damage from going into the ceiling, give up your turn, because when we Blood Rush, they can't give up their turn. Their cards block for 2 and do 4 damage. They can't block. So that's typically how I approach the Phi matchup. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day. If you have any questions, put them down below. I'll do another, Q&A like this sometime in the future if I get enough questions. I always tend to answer in the comments below, but I wanted to spend a little bit more time on like focusing and giving more detailed answers than typing like a 2-sentence response, right? Have a great day.